First of all, hi everybody. Thank you for joining us. We want to thank the Chera family who sponsored this class and this entire day of learning in honor of Yom Haasmaut in the memory of Mr. Stanley Chera A Shalom. We hope you all had the opportunity to enjoy some of the many amazing classes put together by the SEA. They did an amazing job. We thank you all for joining. First of all, my name is Norma Shehebar. I want to introduce my sister, Lily Sutton.
Hi.
Hello. And my cousin, Stephen Eliyahu.
Hi, guys.
And I believe my grandmother is on. So Grandma Lily, feel free to chime in if you like. And we thank you all for joining us as we take you through the life of my grandpa, Mr. Aboudi A, Shalom, and try to draw inspiration from the many amazing things he did throughout his life. So just to begin, I want to say my Grandpa Joe's life was shaped by many character traits: passion, fearlessness, righteousness, camaraderie, and the importance and love for his family and his people. He was a man of conviction and practicality and had the perfect balance of confidence and humility. His actions were driven by passion, tradition, and his belief in destiny. A man who feared no one but God, and a warrior in every sense of the word. He was a hero of the state of Israel and our very own hero of our family. We'll take you through his story and what led this 14 to 15-year-old boy to go into an unknown land and fight for a homeland for the Jewish people. We will start with a clip that we actually have from the Sephardic Heritage Museum, specifically SMH Learn. It's part of their curriculum. And we'll start with that. Stephen, you want to play that? It's a little clip from his experience with first interaction with Zionism in Syria. Okay, Stephen, you want to give us a little background of Grandpa's life in Syria and what inspired him to leave to Eretz Israel?
Yeah, definitely. So despite what, most of us probably think of the Arab world right now and their attitude towards Jews, Grandpa Joe actually really enjoyed a beautiful life growing up. He was born and raised in Chalab, and he would always tell us about the holidays, about going to shul, about his family life, and about how really kind of intimate and beautiful it sounded. He would always say how his father would go get coffee at the Achwa Shweke, which was across the street from them. He attended the Alliance Française, which was a French Jewish school. So he got French education and French language, as well as Jewish education, Hebrew language. And he actually talks about his teacher, who he said his name was Yonah, his Hebrew teacher. He was a shaliach from Palestine, so he sent from Palestine to teach people in Syria. And he said that he gave him his first really spark of the Zionist spirit. But it wasn't actually just Grandpa Joe and just the young people in Syria who were Zionists. Grandpa's father, Hillel, was also very active and very much a part of this whole the whole movement. He would, Grandpa told us how he would help refugees and people who were trying to get to Palestine to try to help found the Jewish state. He would smuggle them through Syria. I think that he housed them in the shul that was right near their house, and then he would arrange for them travel through Lebanon and eventually to get to Palestine.
Yeah. But my grandfather always said, and he even mentions in his book, that this innate feeling that he had, this Zionistic feeling, came even way before he knew what Zionism was. He would always tell us that whenever we would say on the Passover Seder, B'shana haba'a b'Yerushalayim habnuya, that next year we should be celebrating in the land of Israel, that those words always, they really resonated with him, and he had this Zionistic feeling within him. But there was actually one major incident in his life that led him to really go for it and leave. And that was when he found out that his family in Marseille, France, had passed away. All of them perished in the Holocaust, all but one. It was his father's brother and sister were living in Marseille at the time, and they were all sent to Auschwitz, and they found out Selim, his brother, survived, and sent a letter to his father describing the horrors of the Holocaust and telling them that he was the sole survivor of their family. And it was that led my grandfather, that gave him the final push and understood the urgency that it was now's the time that we need a state of Israel. And although his family was extremely Zionistic and they believed in the cause, they really didn't want their son to go fight. I mean, none of us want our kids to go fight and be in war, but
they wanted him to be a doctor.
They wanted him to be a doctor. They wanted him to study. He was very smart. But he's tried to escape twice in the middle of the night, and his father caught him and said, "Nope, you're not going." But by the third time, his father understood that he was passionate and that no matter, he wasn't taking no for an answer. And so he gave him his blessing, and he sent him with money and a bunch of people that were also going to be smuggled into Palestine through Lebanon. And he made it to Rosh HaNikra, and from there to Netanya, where his sister had already been living.
Now, just to put it into perspective, this is a 14-year-old boy going to an unknown land, leaving his whole family. 14-year-olds now, I think it's 10th or 11th grade, I'm not sure. But I just thought it's great to put it into perspective. So now, Stephen, can you tell us the climate in Palestine at the time? What was going on? What it was like there?
Yeah, definitely, Norm. So it's important that we remember that at this time, Palestine is under British rule. And as much as tensions were rising between the Jews and the Arabs in Palestine, at this specific time, they were rising almost even higher between the Jews and the British in Palestine. The British had a quota of the amount of Jews that they would allow into Palestine. And once they reached that quota, they would start sending Jews to internment camps and DP camps. Grandpa remembered in the streets of Netanya, there were British patrols with machine guns at almost every corner. And he even said that he feared them more than anyone at that time. There's one specific story that he told us that's really striking. It really gives you an example of how serious of a situation this was. Apparently the British came to raid the kibbutz that he was on at the time, and they were looking for arms. And to try to throw them off or to get them to go away, all the kibbutzniks, including Grandpa, went out on the lawn of the kibbutz, and they just sat there unarmed, without anything, just sitting there to try to drive the British away. And Grandpa told us that two of his friends were seriously injured at the time during that incident. One of them was stabbed with a bayonet, and another one was shot 5 times. So it really goes to show you just how intense of a situation this was at the time.
Right. And then, Stephen, tell us about the Ma'apilim and the Palyam.
Yeah, exactly. So a short time after that, Grandpa joined the Palyam. So the Palyam is the naval branch.
I think it's just important to note also that they were under the British mandate, which was under the white papers at the time. So the immigration of Jews to Israel was very limited. So because of that, Grandpa decided to join the Palyam and to smuggle these Jews in. And Stephen, go ahead. Right,
Lily's 100% right. Also, yeah, as I said, these Jews that were not being allowed in, they were being sent to DP camps. And these are not, most of these refugees are refugees coming from Europe at the time. They were fleeing the Holocaust. So you can only imagine what kind of terrible situation this would be, where they're fleeing from the Holocaust, only to get turned away at the shores of Palestine and sent to other camps, not concentration camps, but internment camps, DP camps. So Grandpa joined the Palyam to do something about this, to do what was right. The Palyam, as I was saying, is the naval branch of the Palmach, and the Palmach is the striking arm, the elite forces of the Haganah, which was the army for a Jewish state at the time. And one of the main things that they were doing at that time, and that Grandpa was doing, is that they would go under the cover of night and they would attempt to smuggle Jews into Palestine that the British would have otherwise turned away and sent to internment camps. Unfortunately, the British rule was really tough, and most of the time they foiled the plans, and the British would end up sending them away.
Right. And Grandpa told us that they were actually successful in foiling the British blockade with one full ship. And I myself always took pride in the idea and the thought, and actually the state of Israel stands for this today, Kol hamatzil nefesh echad b'Yisrael, keilu kiem olam maleh. Anyone who saves one soul of the Jewish people, it's as though he saved the entire world. So I always take pride in knowing that my grandpa helped bring those refugees into the land of Israel. So As we know, the story unfolds, and the British start to, after the partition plan, the UN partition plan in November 1947, the British begin to leave, and the Arab threat is the threat that now grew stronger. And they were no longer needed as much on the Palyam, because now they were going to have a state of Israel. Passage was going to be allowed, but they needed to defend themselves against the Arab threat. All the surrounding nations would come and fight against this new Jewish state. So my grandfather was now sent to the Palmach, and they sent him as a reinforcement to the Negev, him and 7 other Palmach fighters, to the most southern tip of the Negev, to a kibbutz called Bet Eshel. And there they were on the front lines. They were the first ones the Egyptian army would fight when they would come and attack. Stephen, we have another clip from the Sephardic Heritage Museum, which shows the miracles of the establishment of Medinat Israel, and my grandpa's in the end.
As you guys can see, it was really one of the greatest accomplishments, and Grandpa said it himself, one of the greatest achievements in the world. And as you saw earlier in the video, there was lots of celebration going on. Around the country, people were partying when they heard that the state was actually declared. But funny enough, Grandpa was the furthest thing from celebrating at that time. He didn't even know that the state had been established. As we said earlier, as Norma said, and as you saw in the video, he had been sent south to Beit Eshel to reinforce the kibbutz. Sorry.
Radio's there.
Yeah, and just to put it in some perspective, Norma said that there were 7 of them that were sent down there. They were reinforced by, I think, another 5 soldiers. That's 12 of them against the Egyptian army, which is thousands strong with tanks and artillery. One of the most haunting stories that we heard from that time was, as you heard in the video, Grandpa's commander was killed in one of the first shellings. A few days later, him and one of his best friends, Peretz, were digging a grave for the commander. All of a sudden, the Egyptians opened fire, and Peretz was shot. And he fell down, and he was saying, I can't move. And Grandpa was saying, what do you mean you can't move? Just go into the grave, you'll be covered. And he said, I can't move. So Grandpa jumped into the grave, and he dragged him down, and he protected him, and in all likelihood saved his life. They found out later that the bullet had went through Peretz's spine, and he was paralyzed, and he would never walk again. And as tragic of a story that it is, and it really is, something that I find beautiful about this story is that I actually had the honor of knowing Peretz, and he was at my bar mitzvah, and I think so many family events. And I think me and all my cousins really got to know not only Peretz, but many of Grandpa's friends in the army at that time, brothers really. And it just goes to show you what sort of intense camaraderie that they had. And as I said earlier, the odds here are just really hard to understand. We're talking, again, 12 against thousands.
Well, he also had 40 kibbutz men. They evacuated the women and children, and the men and a few women from the kibbutz, from that actual kibbutz, were also helping in the fight. But yeah, the odds are still
ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so we have one more clip here, and it's from Grandpa's interview with Shalom TV. And this is just him talking about how crazy the odds were, but how somehow he never doubted that they would prevail. Sorry, 1 second.
Did you feel vastly outnumbered?
100%. But no, you cannot even imagine the difference between beside the Arab citizen of Palestine, you got all the armies of the surrounding around the Palestine of Israel. So they came by the thousands.
Then why weren't you frightened?
When you're fighting, you're not frightened. You're not afraid. You're just instinct.
But it feels like you never doubted that somehow you would prevail.
Oh no, never had no, never entered my mind that we will not have a state of Israel. Never entered in mind.
And that's just one of those incredible things that somehow, against all the odds, they never feared, and they knew that all was in the hands of God. Grandpa was in Beit Eshel for nearly 8 months. And again, it's really hard to imagine the conditions there. There were no showers, no changes of clothes, terrible food. They all slept in individual bunkers, and they lived in fear of when the next bomb would come.
Right. After they reached a ceasefire at one point, I think, again, like Stephen said, it was maybe 8 or 9 months. Grandpa went back up to mainland Israel. He joined his base, and they now sent him to the Kinneret. And in the Kinneret was where he was sent to destroy Egyptian warships. And Grandpa loved to tell us in the excitement of what went on. What they would do is they would take these speedboats in the Kinneret, fill them with TNT, and then one of the men would get on, one of the fighters, and drive the speedboat in full speed, quickly jump off the boat, and the boat would go right into the...
Norma, we lost you.
You lost me? Could everyone hear me? Stephen, you hear me? Good. So they would fill up these speedboats. They would fill up speedboats with TNT, and one of the fighters would get on the speedboat, drive at full speed ahead, and quickly jump off, and that speedboat would go and would blow up the Egyptian ship. So that's just one really crazy, fun tale that Grandpa liked to tell us. And of course, we know the nes, the miracle of the state of Israel, the Rabim against the Ma'atim, and ultimately they prevailed. And this modern day Hanukkah story happened. And now I'm sure you guys are wondering, somebody like my grandfather, with all this passion, this love for the land, this love for the people, the love for his people, how did this man end up in New York, and why would he end up here in America and not be in Israel? So Lily, you want to?
Yeah.
Also, I see everybody. Please feel free to write questions, and we're going to try to get it all in the end. But I forgot to say that in the beginning.
Yeah, so my grandfather, okay, now the war is over. He brings his family, he was able to bring his family over from Syria over to Israel, and they ended up settling in Netanya with his sister, near his sister. And most of they live there still today, the ones that are still living. But so after the war, he's a young boy, and like all of us young kids, he wants to travel the world, and he wants to see the world. And at that time, the only way to see the world was to join the Merchant Marines. And so that's exactly what he did. He joined the Merchant Marines, and on one of their explorations around to America, they happened to have docked in Baltimore, and my grandfather gets a telegram. Until this day, he writes it in his book, he has no idea how his family knew that he was docking in Baltimore. He doesn't know how they figured it out, but they did. And in that telegram, it said that his grandmother was passing away, and it was her last wish to see my grandfather. He was named after her husband, and she wanted to see him. She was in New York. She wanted to see him before she died. And so my grandfather went to his captain, explained the situation, and he asked the captain for a couple days off, and the captain said, of course, you have 4 days to go visit your grandmother. My grandfather left the ship in Baltimore, somehow got on a train and figured his way out. I think he was he met a stranger. He figured his way out to New York. He made it to New York, to Brooklyn, to Ocean Parkway, and he went to see his grandmother. And during his visit, she happened to have passed away. He decided, I'm going to stay for the Shiva. He knew that the ship was coming around to New York. So he figured, I'll get on when it gets here. I'll stay for the Shiva. I'll be there for my family. He valued family, even family that he didn't really know so well because they've been in the States. But he decided to do that. So he stays for the Shiva, and then he went back on the boat. And when he gets on the boat, the captain is furious. And you have to understand it's still Army Israel. He disobeyed orders. The captain tells him, I gave you 4 days, you took 7. There's no more vacation days for the next 3 months. My grandfather says, okay, no problem, fine. He goes, I just have one request. My uncle bought me some new clothes, and can I just go back and get the clothes from him? And the captain says, no, you cannot go back. And that was it. My grandfather being passionate and defiant, and he didn't do so well with authority. That night, he jumped ship, and he was considered a deserter, and he was not allowed. That's how he ended up in the States illegally. He was an illegal immigrant because he just jumped ship, and he was considered a deserter of the state of Israel, and he was not able to go back for many years. I think it was only after he got married to my grandmother, when he became a citizen of the United States, that he was able to go back to visit Israel. I think it was in 1961, I think he goes back for the first time. But my grandfather understood, he understood that this was his destiny. I mean, he never planned on raising a family here. He always planned on going back. His heart was there, but he understood that everything was from God, and that God had a plan for him, and this was his plan. And once he settled here, I mean, his family was his all. And he really, he gave it, he relayed that to us all the time.
Yeah, Libi b'mizrach ve'anochi b'sof ma'arav. The pasuk stated, the quote stated by Rabbi Yehuda Levi, that his heart, even though we're not in Israel, even though we're here in America, his heart was always there. And that's something Grandpa always would always say to us. Libi b'mizrach ve'anochi b'sof ma'arav. In fact, he wrote a book about his life. This is the book. It's called From Syria to Palestine, My Fight for a Jewish State. And the way he ends the book is with that specific quote from Rabbi Yehuda Levi. And all his life, he was involved in, he actually helped build the Palmach Museum in Israel, which we encourage you all to go to. It's a great museum. He was involved, he spoke in many schools, many of the yeshiva on Yom Haasmaut. We used to have a float in the parade, honoring the Palmach, together with Mag and David. And they're really, we learned so much from him. And I want to give you a small story that I find really portrayed Grandpa. When we were in Pesach, the last time we had Pesach together, my husband Charles was giving a Dvar Torah about challenges and hard times. And he says, Grandpa, you know how sometimes in life you have hard times, you have challenges. And my grandfather looked at him and he said, no, I don't know. I never really had a hard time. I never really had such serious challenges. And I just find it fitting today, his perspective. And that's how he was. He believed it was destiny. This is what it was. And he would just do what's right. And today we're here during this time, COVID-19. And I just think it's nice to have that kind of perspective. Everyone goes through challenges, but it's how you deal with them. And then I wanted to add one more point. It says in Devarim, I believe, Sh'al abicha v'yagedcha et ziknecha v'yomru lach. Ask your father, and he shall relay it to you, and your elders, and they shall tell you. My family and I had the privilege to live with my grandfather. Actually, both my grandparents were extremely Zionistic, so spending Shabbatot and Chagim with them was a time that we cherished, and we lived a love for Medinat Israel. We lived that feeling of a love for our people, a love for the state of Israel, and Shevet Achim Gam Yachad, the beauty of the whole nation coming together. And I just want to encourage you all to sit with your elders, ask them questions, I spoke to Marlene Mamie. She said there was a study done that people who have a strong attachment to their roots and their heritage, when they go through challenges, they're better, they're more able and capable to succeed because of this. So just thought it was a nice point to share. Now let's look at maybe some of the questions. Stephen, you want to check it out?
I don't see any here, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead.
I don't know what happened here. Oh, here. Here, I see a bunch of questions. Let's see. Wait. Sorry, I'm trying to.
Also, just one other point I would say is that this presentation has been about Grandpa as a soldier because it's about his role in forming the state of Israel. But he was also so much more than a soldier. He was a son, a father, a brother, a friend, and a grandfather, a husband, and a handyman, and a really good businessman too.
Yeah.
So, as much as we love to talk about the war stories, and as much as they are important, he was so much more than just a soldier.
Yeah.
Where can we get the book? I see somebody asked, where can we get the book? I believe my Aunt Sarah Eliyahu has a bunch of copies. I think you could get it from her. It used to be on Amazon. You could check there. I'm not sure it's still there, but it may be there. Any other questions?
And I think someone asked, what's the book called? From Syria to Palestine, My Fight for a Jewish State.